"A servant has no use for an observatory," Hugh Vane announced, loud enough for every guest at the will reading to hear. Clara Bell stood beside the coal scuttle, while 12 years of unpaid wages, faithful service, and nights tending his uncle vanished beneath the laughter. Hugh inherited the house, land, and investments. Clara received only a derelict observatory on the northern moor. Its roof split, its instruments declared worthless, and its taxes due within 30 days. She accepted because refusal meant the workhouse. Clara was no ordinary servant. Her father had taught her to cut gears, balance escapements, and hear a damaged clock before opening its case. On her first night inside the ruin, she wound 7 neglected clocks. By dawn, everyone was running, yet each had surrendered precisely the same 11 minutes. Clara checked them against Samuel Bell's brass-cased watch. The long regulator in the northern bay showed 6:21. The watch showed 6:32. 6 smaller clocks in the circular gallery agreed with the regulator. Different pendulums, different makers, the same error. An hour earlier, 7 factory bells had sounded from the valley below Redwater Moor. They rang before the church clock struck 6. Clara had assumed the church was slow. Now she wondered whether the mills were early. The observatory had once distributed standard time to the wool and cotton works around Felcombe. Black telegraph wires still descended the moor on leaning poles, branching toward 7 stone mills along the beck. Each gallery clock carried the name of one works on a small enamel plate: Crown Mill, Low Weir, Northfold, Briar and Sons, Redwater Spinning, Marsh End, and Vane Cloth Works. At 5:49 by Samuel's watch, all 7 clocks had stopped. Clara counted the silence, while the mill bells below called workers through their gates. At 6, the pendulums resumed without advancing their hands. 11 minutes had disappeared from every dial. The loss was deliberate. Behind each movement, a secondary lever connected the clock to its mill wire. An incoming bell signal lifted the pallet from the escapement and held it until a concealed release cam completed 11 minutes. At noon, a pulse from the railway telegraph would correct the clocks to Greenwich time. Each morning, they displayed the difference between when the mills claimed work began and the true hour. Someone had built 7 mechanical witnesses. Clara closed the northern case and looked through the broken dome toward Vane House, 4 miles away. Hugh had called the instruments worthless without examining them. That meant either he knew nothing about the observatory or knew enough to want everyone else to believe nothing remained. The property itself offered no immediate answer. Moorwatch Observatory was a round gritstone tower joined to a 2-room keeper's cottage. Wind had torn open the dome, split 2 roof ribs, and driven rain down the central telescope pier. 3 windows lacked glass. The cottage chimney leaned away from the wall. Moss filled the gutters, and one corner of the floor yielded beneath Clara's boot. The bequest included 4 acres of rough moor and £7 6 shillings in overdue rates. Hugh had retained £108 credited to Clara over 12 years at £9 annually. Elias Vane provided food and lodging but entered the wages in a private household account, promising payment when Clara left his service. The account vanished before probate. Hugh said a servant could not collect money recorded only in a dead man's private hand. Clara owned 4 shillings, Samuel's watch, a roll of small tools, and the brown wool dress she had worn at the will reading. She spent the morning making the cottage survivable. She cleared the flue, nailed sacking over one window, and moved her bedding beneath the least damaged ceiling. The stove burned peat poorly, but gave enough heat to dry her stockings. Rainwater collected in 3 instrument trays beneath the dome. Repairs to the tower would cost more than the building's valuation. At noon, a telegraph pulse clicked inside the northern clock. Its minute hand advanced 11 divisions. The other 6 corrected at the same instant. The evidence of the early mill bells vanished from their faces, not from their mechanisms. Each arresting lever moved a tiny numbered wheel, one tooth. The wheels contained hundreds of teeth and had not been reset in years. Crown Mill's counter showed 2,841. Low Weir's showed 2,837. The others differed by fewer than 20. Clara calculated roughly. 6 working mornings a week, minus holidays and stoppages, would produce about 300 arrests a year. The counters held nearly 10 years of stolen mornings. She did not yet know whom the record could help or how it could be proved. She knew Hugh's laughter had been premature. The first person to climb Redwater Moor was Martin Keel, a millwright with iron-gray hair and 2 fingers missing from his left hand. He carried a toolbox, a loaf, and no introduction. Ruth Hargreaves saw smoke, he said. She thought Vane had sent men to strip the brass. He sent me instead. Martin examined the split cottage roof and the 7 clocks. His gaze stopped at the enamel mill plates. Those were disconnected after Samuel Bell died. The wires still carry the work bells. Then they were reconnected without anyone telling the hands below. He spoke of mill workers when he said hands. Clara had heard Hugh use the same word for people and clock pointers, as if both moved only when an owner wound them. Martin offered to brace the cottage chimney and patch one roof slope for £1 12 shillings, materials reused. Clara could pay 6 shillings now, and the remainder through clock repairs. He placed 3 movements on the bench, an alarm clock, a spinner's watch, and the dial train from a carding room. The carding clock had been set fast by 11 minutes. Its regulator was pinned, so workers could not correct it. All mill clocks are fast, Martin said. Management says factory time governs inside the gates. Do wages begin when the bell rings? Wages begin at 6. The gates close when the early bell rings. Anyone outside loses a quarter day. The mills received 11 unpaid minutes from every worker who entered on time, according to the only public clock they were permitted to see. Clara repaired the 3 movements and earned 8 shillings. Martin returned with slate, 2 panes of mismatched glass, and Ruth Hargreaves, who worked 4 looms at Crown Mill and kept accounts for the Weavers' Mutual box. Ruth was 40, broad-shouldered, and direct. "Can the tower clocks prove when the bells rang?" she asked. "They count each early signal. They do not yet record a date. Then Hugh will say the counters moved while the place stood empty." "He will." Ruth nodded, satisfied that Clara understood the difficulty. She brought a bundle of wage slips collected from 7 mill families. Each listed a full week at the contracted hours. None recorded the 11 extra minutes. "My daughter Alice was fined yesterday for reaching the gate at 5:52, Ruth said. The church clock said 8 minutes to 6. Clara looked toward the telegraph wires. Mechanical counters established a pattern. Wage slips established what had been paid. They still needed a dated record, linking the two. That evening, she reopened the northern clock. Beneath the counter wheel was a narrow slot, clogged with black lint. Clara drew out a strip of stiff paper, no wider than her finger. Tiny punctures marked a line across it, followed by 11 blank spaces and a second line. At the margin, Samuel had stamped his familiar maker's mark. A small balance wheel enclosing the letter B. The paper did not slide freely. It passed behind the clock, through a porcelain guide, and into a narrow lead tube embedded in the wall. Clara loosened the guide, but refused to pull harder. If 10 years of records remained inside the masonry, one impatient tug could tear them into useless fragments. The same arrangement appeared behind every clock. 7 paper channels converged toward the central telescope pier. Samuel had not merely counted early bells. He had made each mill produce a separate strip and sent the records to one protected collector. Clara's first task was to keep the evidence dry. Martin and 2 apprentices repaired the cottage roof over 6 days, replacing only the broken rafters and using slate from an abandoned sheep shed. Clara carried mortar, sorted nails, and repaired clocks after dark. By the end of the week, one room held heat, and the west instrument bay no longer admitted rain. Workers began climbing after sunset with clocks wrapped in aprons. Clara charged a penny to clean an alarm movement, 2 pence for a new spring, and more only when she supplied metal. She wrote every payment beside the owner's name. Some customers brought no money and paid with peat, oats, or labor. The account book showed which was which. Ruth's daughter Alice came with a small Verge watch confiscated by the gatekeeper at Crown Mill. Alice was 17, pale from lint-filled rooms, and angry enough to shake. "Mr. Shaw says private watches encourage disputes," she said. He returned it after bending the hand. The hour hand had been forced 11 minutes forward, then pressed against the minute hand so neither could move. Clara freed them and found the train undamaged. "What time did you reach the gate?" 5:50. "Two by this watch." "They fined me 3 shillings. 3 shillings equaled nearly 2 days of Alice's pay. Clara corrected the watch against the noon telegraph pulse and sealed its regulator with wax bearing Samuel's balance wheel mark. "If anyone moves it," she said, "the seal will break." Alice wore the watch openly the next morning. The gate bell rang at 5:49. She remained outside until her watch showed 6, joined by 4 other workers. Cuthbert Shaw, Hugh's manager, fined all 5 and dismissed Alice for organized idleness. Hugh visited the observatory before noon. He did not mention the dismissals. He admired the patched roof as though Clara had improved an asset he still expected to own. "A Manchester concern is purchasing the 7 mills," he said. "They require clear title to the timelines and the moor station. Convey the observatory to me, and I will pay the rates plus £12. "And my wages?" "There were no wages held." "Then £12 must be a high price for worthless instruments." Hugh's eyes settled on the open northern case. "My uncle experimented with labor clocks. The work was abandoned because Samuel Bell made claims beyond his station." "What claims?" "That is precisely the sort of question that kept him poor." He gave Clara 3 days to reconsider. If the sale proceeded, the buyers would petition to move the time station into the valley and demolish the unsafe tower. Hugh already possessed a surveyor's report calling Moorwatch a danger to workers and livestock. Clara watched him descend toward Vane Cloth Works. His objective was no longer merely recovering a family property. He needed the observatory removed before outside buyers examined the mill clocks. Mr. Beecham, a solicitor in Felcombe, confirmed that the will gave Clara the land and fixed instruments. A mill company could not demolish them without purchasing the property or proving a public danger. The split dome made the danger claim credible. Clara needed a structural inspection and money to complete urgent bracing. Beecham also studied Alice's sealed watch, wage slip, and dismissal notice. The Factory Acts limited the working hours of young persons and required posted periods. An early gate bell, followed by an unpaid fine, might interest the regional inspector, but one morning could be dismissed as a clock error. 7 independent mill records would be harder to dismiss, he said, if they can be dated and their custody explained. He wrote to Inspector Edmund Sorrell and to the bank named in Elias Vane's probate inventory. His fee was 12 shillings. Clara paid 4 and promised the rest. She returned to the paper channels. The strips traveled upward through the telescope pier rather than down into the floor. At the top, each lead tube ended beside a narrow brass chain that disappeared into the surviving half of the dome. A heavy counterweight hung inside the northeast masonry, inaccessible behind a bolted plate. Martin recognized the arrangement as part of the old dome shutter. The shutter opened before the roof split. Weight came down, panels went up. This chain does not connect to the panels. Then Samuel borrowed the weight for something else. The counterweight had remained raised because the 7 clocks had not been wound together since Elias stopped observations. When each clock received an early bell, a ratchet released one tooth. 7 releases should lower the weight a measured distance. The 11-minute noon correction rewound part of the system. Over time, the mechanism could lift and lower an archive drum without exposing it to damp hands in the gallery. Clara cleaned the chains, lubricated the ratchets, and repaired 2 broken return springs. She did not reset the numbered counters. Their existing totals were evidence. Instead, She marked every position with ink and had Martin witness the marks. At 5:49 the next morning, the valley bells rang. 7 clocks stopped. 7 ratchets released. The hidden counterweight descended 18 inches. A cylindrical copper canister emerged from the hollow center of the telescope pier, suspended above the floor. It was not a treasure chest or secret room. It resembled a large clock drum, sealed against damp with leather gaskets, and fitted with 7 paper spindles. Only one spindle still carried a complete roll. The other 6 had been cut, leaving short-dated ends clamped beneath their guides. Someone had entered the collector years earlier and removed most of Samuel's records. The surviving roll belonged to Vein Cloth Works. Its first entry was dated 12 years before Clara arrived. Its last had been punched that very morning, when Alice and 4 others were dismissed for refusing to donate 11 minutes. The canister lid carried a calibration table in Samuel's hand. A long puncture meant an incoming mill bell. A pair of round holes meant the true hour from the observatory regulator. 11 blank spaces between them measured 11 minutes. Each midnight, the master clock punched a date code. The surviving roll could establish every early start at Vein Cloth Works for 12 years. The 6 cut ends established something else. Their last complete dates were identical. The 3rd of August, 1858. Samuel had died 4 days later after collapsing at his bench. Clara had believed grief, and debt stopped his heart. Now she wondered what happened on August 3rd. Ruth knew. That morning, women at Crown Mill refused to enter before 6. Reginald Vane sent constables to clear the gate and dismissed 23 workers. Samuel arrived carrying a portable clock and accused the mill managers of violating both wage agreements and limits on young workers' hours. By the end of the week, all 7 mills had barred him from their premises. The valley said he had gone mad over 11 minutes, Ruth recalled. No one asked how many mornings were hidden inside them. The numbered wheels answered. Roughly 2,800 early starts across 7 mills, multiplied by hundreds of workers, represented years of unpaid labor. Yet the counters alone could not calculate individual losses. Employment lists changed. Mills closed on different days. Some workers arrived after the early bell and were fined rather than working the extra time. Clara needed wage books, gate registers, and the 6 missing rolls. Hugh controlled the first 2. Someone in the Vane family had removed the rolls. Inspector Sorrell arrived on the 17th morning after Clara inherited the property. He brought an assistant's chronometer sealed at Leeds and reached Vein Cloth Works before the gates opened. The mill bell rang at 5:49. Alice's watch, the church clock, Sorrell's chronometer, and Samuel's watch all agreed within seconds. At 6, Sorrell climbed to Moorwatch and watched the 7 clocks resume. Clara lowered the copper canister in the presence of Sorrell, Beecham, Martin, and Ruth. She did not remove the surviving roll until each had signed a description of its seal, guide, and dated end. Sorrell could issue notices concerning present hours and the employment of young persons. Recovering old wages or enforcing a private trust required a court. He asked Clara to surrender the current section of the Vane roll as evidence. Beecham advised waiting until he obtained an order protecting the full canister. Giving Sorrell the strip would alert Hugh that one continuous record survived. Hugh might seek the tower before Clara secured its ownership and structure. That afternoon, Alice and the 4 dismissed workers came to the cottage. Crown Mill had circulated their names. None of the 7 works would employ them. Alice's mother could not support both her and 2 younger sons from the mutual box for long. Clara thought of the split dome, the rates due, and Hugh's demolition threat. Secrecy protected the observatory. It did not feed the people whose stolen time gave the observatory meaning. She gave Sorrell the strip. She also hired Alice at 5 shillings a week to clean movements, copy accounts, and tend the paper recorder. Clara could afford the wage for 3 weeks if customers continued coming. She wrote the terms twice and handed Alice one copy before the girl touched a tool. "You need not keep me if the tower fails," Alice said. "If the tower fails, the account will still show what I owe you." Alice's first lesson was not how to clean a pivot. Clara showed her how to open the workshop ledger, enter the date, describe the work, and carry the amount into a second column. Alice wrote carefully, pressing so hard that the nib caught the paper. At Crown they kept one book for wages and another for fines. She said, "We never saw either. Here you will see both sides of every account." Clara gave her a key to the tool cupboard and required her to count its contents at the end of each day. The formality embarrassed Alice until a customer claimed that his silver watch chain had been left with the movement. Alice turned to the intake line and read aloud, "Brass watch, cracked crystal, no chain." The man withdrew his claim without apology. Afterward, Alice recopied the entry in a firmer hand. During the quiet hours, they made dated observation sheets for the 7 gallery clocks. Alice took the northern window, where she could see the chimney lamps at Vaincloth Works. Clara stood beside the regulator with Samuel's watch. At 5:49, the mill bell crossed the valley, and the Vane clock stopped. Alice wrote the time without being prompted. At 6, the church struck, and the clock resumed. At noon, the railway signal restored its face. They repeated the watch the following morning, then the next. Rain obscured 2 mills, but the wires still clicked. On the third day, Crown Mill rang twice, once at 5:49 and once at 6. Its gallery clock arrested only for the first signal, because Samuel's lever rejected a second pulse while the cam was engaged. The device had been designed against the excuse Hugh was already preparing that an echo or accidental contact moved the mechanism. Alice copied the lever's action onto a sheet of brown wrapping paper. Her drawing was clumsy, but her labels were exact. Incoming bell. Arrest Paul. 11-minute cam. True hour release. Noon correction. Clara pinned it over the bench. "You have the patience for mechanism," she said. "I had patience for 4 looms. That is not the same as choosing where to place it." The distinction silenced them both. Clara had chosen none of the 12 years at Vane House merely because she trusted Elias's promise. Alice had chosen neither the early bell nor the dismissal that now made apprenticeship possible. A better room did not make the coercion that led to it benevolent. That evening, Ruth brought the mutual box ledger and asked Clara to estimate what 11 minutes might mean across the valley. Alice multiplied one worker's weekly loss, then a room's, then a mill's. The first total grew so large that she assumed she had shifted a figure. Clara checked it and crossed out half the sum. "Why?" Alice asked. "The arithmetic is right. The assumption is not. Not every loom ran every morning. Not every person was employed for all 12 years. Some came after the first bell and lost a fine instead of time." Ruth watched Clara reduce the amount again for holidays and flood closures. "Hugh will reduce it further. Then he must do so with a gatebook, not an opinion." They agreed to make no public claim for a total until the rolls could be compared with employment records. Ruth would collect names, mills, departments, and years of service without promising a sum. Alice would keep observations of current bells. Clara would preserve the mechanisms and explain only what she could demonstrate. Before leaving, Ruth placed her hand over the crossed-out estimate. "People will say you are timid. Let them. If 1 false pound enters the claim, Hugh will use it to bury 1,000 true shillings." The following Sunday, 37 workers climbed the moor to give their names. Some expected Clara to open the copper canister immediately and divide whatever money it contained. Others believed the observatory hid Elias's private fortune. Clara showed them the clock cases, the sealed roll, and the rain buckets under the split dome. She explained that the record might prove time, not conjure wages for people whose employment could not be traced. An elderly carter named Mrs. Pike asked whether her dead husband's minutes counted. Clara said she did not know until Beecham examined the trust. A young spinner demanded to know why Alice received 5 shillings, while dismissed workers received nothing. Clara opened the ledger and showed the 3 weeks she could fund, the repairs Alice completed, and the exact balance remaining. The meeting ended without unity. 11 people withdrew their names. 26 left them. Mrs. Pike returned the next day, with her husband's wage slips tied in blue thread. It was the first family record placed beside Samuel's mechanical one. Sorrel served Vane Cloth Works with a notice requiring its posted hours to match an independent clock. He began similar inspections at the other 6 mills. Hugh answered by disconnecting every mill wire at the moor boundary. The tower clocks continued ordinary time, but no longer received the early bells. He told the Manchester buyers that a dismissed servant and discontented workers had tampered with obsolete apparatus to obstruct a lawful sale. Then the bank replied to Beecham's inquiry. Elias's probate inventory referred to £480 in consolidated stock under the name Felcombe Equitable Time Trust. The bank held the stock, but had frozen it, because no acting trustee produced the founding deed after Samuel's death. Reginald had claimed the trust never became effective. Elias refused to release the money into the Vane estate, leaving it suspended for 12 years. The trust was not Clara's fortune. Its title suggested compensation for workers or maintenance of the time system. If the missing deed survived, the observatory might establish both its purpose and beneficiaries. Hugh came to Moorwatch with Cuthbert Shaw and a surveyor. They measured the cracked dome ribs, chimney lean, and northeast wall. The surveyor marked 2 stones with red chalk. "You have opened machinery connected to my mills and delivered private records to an inspector," Hugh said. "The buyers will not proceed while this nuisance stands." "Then tell them why your bells ring 11 minutes before the posted hour. Efficient workers are at their stations before the shift begins. Efficient employers pay for the time they require." Shaw looked away. Hugh did not. 2 days later, the district magistrates issued a temporary safety notice. Unless Clara braced the split dome and northeast wall within 10 days, the tower could be closed to occupation. Hugh had offered to undertake demolition at no cost to the parish. The notice did not transfer ownership, but it would remove Clara, silence the clocks, and leave the copper canister unguarded. Urgent bracing cost £3.10. The rates required £7.06 before the month ended. Clara had £2.14 after paying Alice and Beecham. Ruth offered the mutual box. Clara refused money set aside for sickness and burials. Martin offered unpaid labor, but could not purchase timber. Alice offered to return her wages. "No," Clara said. "The first account written in this workshop will not begin with a woman surrendering what she earned." They needed the observatory to produce income before Hugh's deadlines closed around it. Clara studied the 7 disconnected clocks, the intact noon telegraph line, and the mills below. The valley no longer trusted factory time. That distrust itself might be worth a service. The next morning she posted a notice at the church gate, offering to test and seal any worker's watch against Greenwich time for 1 penny. For 6 pence a week, a shop, school, carrier, or workshop could receive a daily correct time signal from Moorwatch. Martin carried the first wire to his millwright's shop. The schoolmistress ordered the second. Ruth persuaded 3 cooperative merchants to take the third. Within 5 days, 186 workers had their watches checked. Clara earned 15 shillings, 6 pence in pennies. The service subscriptions brought another £4. Martin used their advance to purchase timber and worked with 4 customers who preferred labor to payment. On the 9th day, the surveyor returned. He struck the temporary braces with his cane, checked the wall plumb, and withdrew the closure recommendation. The tower remained ugly, wet, and occupied. Hugh lost the quickest path to demolition. That evening, someone entered through the unglazed eastern window, opened the northern clock, and removed its numbered counterwheel. The thief left Samuel's tools and the brass movement untouched. Only the piece that carried 2,800 and 41 early starts, was missing. Mud beneath the window bore a narrow heel and a square nail pattern common to mill boots. Clara could prove entry and theft, not the person responsible. Hugh used the loss immediately. He told Sorrel that Clara's evidence was so unreliable that parts disappeared from locked cases. Cuthbert Shaw announced that the vein counter had never existed. The Manchester buyers delayed their inspection but did not withdraw. Beecham obtained a constable's inventory of the remaining 6 wheels and the copper canister. Nothing else could be removed without court permission. That protected the evidence from Hugh and prevented Clara from opening or altering it. The canister was sealed inside the telescope pier. The 6 clocks kept working, but the missing northern mechanism left an empty click each time the early bell circuit was tested from the gallery. The rates fell due 3 days later. Correct time subscriptions, repair earnings, and a winter grazing lease on the 4 Moor acres produced the final amount. Clara paid £7 6 shillings in coins ranging from halfpennies to half-crowns. The parish clerk counted them twice and issued a receipt broad enough to cover Hugh's first purchase offer. Clara had secured the property and lost the strongest total. For 2 nights, she blamed herself for not moving the wheel. Then she remembered why she had left it in place. Evidence protected by rules was harder to use quickly, but harder for powerful men to call invention. She built a temporary replacement solely to keep the clock train balanced. Before fitting it, she measured the counter arbor. It extended through the backplate farther than the 6 others. The missing wheel had driven not only its visible number but a second shaft inside the wall. Martin traced that shaft upward to the dome counterweight. When he calculated the leverage, the mass did not agree with the shutter design. The weight was nearly 40 pounds heavier than the surviving roof panels required. A plugged inspection hole in its base carried Samuel's balance wheel stamp. He used the weight as a lift, Martin said, and perhaps as a dry box. The counterweight belonged to the fixed observatory mechanism under Clara's will, but the court seal on the evidence collector complicated access. Beecham requested a supervised examination rather than risk Hugh, claiming that Clara planted whatever they found. The magistrates appointed Sorrel, the parish clerk, and an independent clockmaker from Leeds to attend. The examination took place on November 19th. Clara fitted her temporary wheel after marking it new work in letters no one could mistake. She set its position from the final punched total on the vein roll, not from memory. The 6 original counters and 1 replacement released the lift chain. Martin lowered the counterweight onto timber blocks. The lead casing had no hinge. Samuel had fitted a threaded bronze plug beneath its iron eye, accessible only when the weight was fully down. Clara used a pin spanner cut to match the 11 holes around the plug. On the 11th turn, the seal of hardened tallow broke. Inside the lead weight was a copper sleeve packed with dry wool. 6 paper rolls lay around a folded parchment. Their cut ends matched those in the collector. Each roll carried years of dated early bell punches from one of the other mills. Samuel had not lost the records. He had cut and hidden them on the 3rd of August 1858, after the gate protest, leaving the vein roll in use because Elias still controlled the observatory line. Reginald's men searched the cases and collector but never lowered the heavy dome weight. The parchment was the founding deed of the Felcombe Equitable Time Trust. 7 mill owners had signed it in 1856 when they licensed Samuel and Elias's standard time system. Each promised that posted hours would follow the observatory signal. Any savings or penalties created by a deliberate departure were to be calculated from the witness rolls and paid into a fund for affected workers. License income supported the observatory and a technical school for mill apprentices. Reginald's signature appeared first. The deed named the bank, the consolidated stock, and the replacement procedure for trustees. Elias's later appointment of Clara as mechanical trustee already sat at the bank, valid only if the founding deed could be produced. The sealed copper sleeve completed the chain. Samuel's service notebook lay beneath the deed. He recorded every change to the clock counters and described the August protest. Reginald ordered him to remove the arresting levers and surrender the rolls. Samuel instead hid 6, preserved the 7th under Elias's protection, and warned that he would place the matter before the factory inspector. 4 days later, he died of a seizure at his bench before sending the packet. His final pages were not addressed to Clara, yet she recognized lessons he had given her as a girl. "A clock owner may command the hands," he wrote, "but the escapement remembers every force placed upon it." He chose 11-minute arrest cams because the stolen interval had to become physically visible. A worker could be told she imagined an early bell. 7 stopped clocks could not all imagine together. Clara had spent 12 years thinking Samuel's last dispute ruined him over a few minutes. The notebook showed that he understood the true scale. 11 minutes from one worker looked trivial. 11 minutes from 600 workers, 6 mornings a week, built wealth large enough to make theft appear ordinary. The copper sleeve also held a small packet Elias added later. It contained copies of the 7 mil license payments and annual notes acknowledging Clara's retained wages. Each year, Elias transferred £9 from his household account into a Vane estate suspense fund rather than paying Clara directly. The total was £108. Hugh inherited that fund among the investments he claimed at the will reading. Elias's accompanying note offered no grand explanation. He admitted that after Samuel's death, he feared Reginald would close the mills and blame the workers if the trust were enforced. He kept the money beyond Reginald's reach, but allowed Clara to serve him without knowing what her father had built. By appointing her trustee and leaving Moorwatch to her, he attempted to repair privately what he had failed to defend publicly. Clara felt anger more cleanly than gratitude. Elias had treated secrecy as courage because he never paid its daily cost. Still, his records preserved her wages, Samuel's work, and the workers' claim. She could use a coward's late honesty without mistaking it for bravery. The independent clockmaker certified that the rolls, counters, and mechanisms belonged to one continuous system. Sorrel matched dates on the rolls with mill notices, holiday closures, and Alice's current dismissal. The parish clerk recorded the seals and custody. Beecham carried the trust deed to the bank. Hugh's solicitor sought an injunction before the documents could be used. He claimed Reginald signed the deed only as a trial and that no worker could identify every early morning across 12 years. The court refused to stop the bank from recognizing Clara as trustee, but ordered a full accounting before distributions began. Hugh responded by closing Vane Cloth Works for 1 week and blaming Clara for the lost wages. Families who had supported Moorwatch now faced empty cupboards. Stones struck the cottage door after dark. One bore a scrap of paper asking whether 11 minutes were worth 6 days without bread. Clara did not answer with a speech. She opened the time service account book and used its small reserve to buy flour for the mutual kitchen, recording the payment as a loan to the trust pending court approval. Ruth objected until Clara showed the entry and interest set at 0. "If we win," Clara said, "the trust repays the service. If we lose, I do." The decision left nothing for winter copper or the second cottage room. It kept 32 families fed until the mill reopened under pressure from its Manchester buyers. Those buyers now demanded an independent accounting before completing the sale. Hugh had tried to make the workers punish Clara for revealing their stolen time. Instead, his lockout gave them a current wage loss bearing his signature. The accounting began in December and continued through February. Court clerks copied employment books from all 7 mills. Sorrel supplied posted-hour notices and inspection dates. Ruth and 6 other workers identified seasonal closures, strikes, flood stoppages, and weeks when a mill ran only 5 mornings. Clara refused to count any day the rolls could not support. Precision reduced the total, but it made the remaining claim difficult to attack. The calculation did not assume every worker lost 11 minutes every day. Gate registers showed who entered before the true hour. Fine books showed who arrived after the early bell, but before 6. Wage books showed contracted hours and rates. For each verified period, The accountants applied the worker's actual rate to the extra minutes, or restored an improper fine. Children and young persons received separate consideration because the early starts exceeded their permitted hours. Disputes arose at nearly every page. Crown Mill's gatebook listed Mary Pike for 8 years, but omitted her department during 2 of them. The trust accountant proposed excluding both years. Ruth found cardroom accident entries signed by Mary on dates that matched the roll, and Clara accepted only the weeks those entries supported. A low-weir foreman claimed the early bell merely opened the yard. 3 oil room invoices showed that workers collected machine lamps before 6, and production sheets recorded the first frames moving by the supposed starting hour. The 11 minutes had not been spent waiting at a gate. One claimant brought wage slips belonging to a cousin with the same name. Another remembered working at Northfold during a year when the mill stood closed after a boiler fire. Clara removed both claims. Each refusal cost goodwill. Yet Beecham noticed that Hugh's solicitor stopped alleging general fraud. The ledger of rejected claims had become evidence of the standard applied to those retained. At night, Alice read punch dates while Clara compared them with copied registers. The work lacked the satisfaction of a repaired movement. It produced no sudden tick, only columns that agreed or failed to agree. On a February morning, they connected Mary Pike's final wage slip to a roll entry made 3 days before her husband died. 11 minutes, at his rate, amounted to less than a penny. Multiplied through his verified years, the sum could buy Mrs. Pike coal for a winter. All that mechanism for less than a penny a day, Alice said. Clara looked at the thousands of black punctures. That is why the mechanism was necessary. No one guards what looks too small to steal. Hugh called the process impossible until the Manchester buyers reminded him that his sale prospectus praised 12 years of uninterrupted centralized time discipline across the 7 works. He had used Samuel's system to increase the value of the mills while denying that the observatory records belonged to it. His own prospectus connected the mechanism, dates, and management authority. Sorrell found another connection in Cuthbert Shaw's property book. On the morning after the observatory theft, Shaw recorded 1 brass counterwheel, Vane Station, 2,841 operations, delivered to H. Vane for safekeeping. Hugh had signed the margin. He returned the wheel through his solicitor after Beecham demanded it. The independent clockmaker matched its arbor scratches to the northern movement and its count to the last entry on the surviving roll. Hugh insisted he believed the wheel belonged to Vane Cloth Works. The court noted that he had entered Clara's property at night without permission and removed a fixed component after a public safety notice failed to close the tower. Whether described as theft or safekeeping, the act damaged his credibility and required him to pay the repair and legal costs. The public hearing took place at Felcombe Mechanics Hall. The Manchester purchasers requested it before signing, and the magistrates allowed workers to attend because the trust beneficiaries could not be identified without them. More than 300 people filled the hall and the street outside. Hugh sat with mill solicitors beneath a display of cloth samples intended for the sale. Clara brought no dramatic chest. She placed 1 original clock movement, 1 early bell roll, Samuel's notebook, and the sealed trust copy on a plain table. The remaining evidence stayed with the court. Sorrell began by setting his chronometer to true time. At his signal, Martin activated a mill bell contact 11 minutes early. The observatory clock stopped. A duplicate wage dial continued. When the true hour arrived, the clock resumed, leaving 11 minutes visible between the two. Alice then operated the noon correction, and the public hands aligned again. "If you looked only at noon," Clara said, "you would believe no time had ever been taken." Ruth read 3 entries from the wage books. A woman at Crown Mill worked from the early bell for 9 years. A 12-year-old piecer at Low Weir accumulated extra time beyond his posted hours. Alice lost 3 shillings for refusing to enter before 6. Each entry matched a dated punch on its mill roll. Hugh argued that workers always arrived early to prepare looms. Ruth asked whether the looms belonged to the workers and whether the preparation produced cloth for their homes. He said preparation was part of efficient employment. Then it is employment, Sorrel replied. Beecham traced legal ownership in order. Samuel and Elias designed the recording system. 7 owners licensed it and signed the trust deed. The bank received consolidated stock and Elias's later appointment of Clara. Elias's will transferred Moorwatch and its fixed mechanisms to her. The wage notes and estate transfers established the separate debt of £108. None of those facts depended on rumor or a single hidden page. The Manchester Buyers' Council asked Hugh why the 6 rolls were cut in 1858. Hugh blamed Samuel. Clara agreed that Samuel cut them and explained why. Reginald had ordered surrender, so Samuel moved the continuous records into a dry counterweight while leaving matching dated ends in place. The cuts established provenance rather than destruction. Paper fibers, spindle widths, date codes, and sequential punches joined exactly. Hugh's last defense was that Reginald's signature on the trust did not bind later companies. The Buyers' Council produced license payments the mills had continued making for 4 years after Samuel's death. The companies treated the agreement as valid when it delivered synchronized bells. They stopped only the payments meant for workers. The hearing ended without applause. Accountants still had sums to verify, and many older workers lacked complete registers. Yet the central question was settled. The 11 minutes were not voluntary preparation or a defective clock. They were a management instruction, recorded against true time and excluded from wages. The purchasers changed the terms of sale. They would acquire 5 mills only after verified wage adjustments were funded, current hours corrected, and Moorwatch appointed independent timekeeper. Vane Cloth Works and Crown Mill remained with the Vane Company until their larger liabilities were resolved. Hugh's expected profit fell by nearly half. The court approved a settlement in April. The original trust stock and accumulated interest formed a permanent relief and education fund. The mills paid retrospective adjustments where rolls and employment records identified individuals. When a worker had died, payment went to the spouse or children named in parish records. Unclaimed sums remained in the trust rather than returning to owners. No one received a fortune. Ruth's adjustment repaired her cottage roof and replaced 2 pawned blankets. Alice recovered the 3-shilling fine and several months of verified extra time. An older spinner received enough to leave work during a worsening chest illness. More important, every remaining mill posted true hours beside a sealed independent clock. Clara's £108 came from the Vane estate suspense account with interest. Hugh also paid the observatory repair caused by the removed wheel and a portion of Beecham's costs. The magistrates found no proof that Hugh ordered the nighttime entry itself. Shaw accepted responsibility and lost his managerial position. Hugh was removed as trustee and managing director because he received the wheel, concealed the time practice during negotiations, and imposed the retaliatory lockout. He retained Vane House and substantial investments. Consequence did not require making him destitute. It required taking away his authority to price other people's minutes. After the hearing, Hugh waited beside Clara's table while workers filed out. "My uncle could have paid you at any time," he said. "He could have, and you served him anyway. I believed an account bearing my name meant something." Hugh glanced at Samuel's counterwheel. "You have made an industry from accounts. Your industry already depended on them." He left before the hall emptied. Clara did not watch him go. Moorwatch remained a damaged building. The settlement did not permit Clara to spend worker funds on private stone and copper. She used her recovered wages carefully. £12 for the cottage wall and chimney, 18 for timber ribs beneath the dome, 6 for glass, and 5 for drainage. She placed £40 in savings and kept enough to pay Alice through winter. The time service contract provided steady income. 5 mills paid Moorwatch to send a true hour signal and maintain sealed local clocks. The two vein works joined later under court supervision. Schools, carriers, shops, and the cooperative bakery retained their subscriptions. Clock repairs filled the gaps between quarterly payments. Restoration took 19 months. Martin directed the masonry and roof work, hiring men at stated daily rates. The dome received zinc over its western half and repaired copper over the east. The new metals did not match. Clara refused to darken them artificially. Anyone looking up could see which sections survived, which had failed, and which were honestly replaced. The Equitable Time Trust leased the Eastern Gallery for evening instruction. It paid rent to the observatory rather than expecting Clara to donate the room. Ruth became one of 3 elected worker trustees. Beecham served as legal clerk, and a mill owner held the 3rd seat. Every payment required 2 signatures from different groups. Alice completed her first year as Clara's apprentice and learned to cut a counterwheel from brass plate. A 14-year-old mill boy named Thomas Reed joined her at the second bench. Both received written terms and wages every Saturday. Clara kept duplicate accounts in separate locked boxes and gave each apprentice a quarterly copy. Inspector Sorrell continued unannounced visits. He occasionally found a foreman trying to ring a preparation bell 3 minutes early. The sealed mill clock recorded the attempt, and the trust charged the time. No system made owners virtuous. It made concealment more expensive. The village did not become uniformly kind. Mr. Naylor at the inn said workers had known mills began early and should have bargained better. He also set his public room clock from Moorwatch because customers complained when it differed. Some families blamed Clara for the week-long lockout. Others brought Pete when snow blocked the road. She accepted both facts without forcing them into a single moral. Elias's telescope returned to use after Martin rebuilt its floor support. On clear evenings, Clara opened the dome and showed Saturn to schoolchildren. Astronomy had not caused the injustice, and she would not surrender the stars to the men who had hidden beneath scientific respectability. A penny from each visitor maintained the lenses. The first complete annual audit took place on the 3rd of August 1872, 14 years after Samuel hid the rolls. At 5:45, workers gathered outside 7 mill gates carrying watches sealed at Moorwatch. Managers stood beside new clocks whose cases could not be opened without breaking numbered wire. The bells remained silent at 5:49. Inside the observatory, Clara watched 7 pendulums continue without interruption. Alice tended the paper collector. Ruth sat at the account desk. Martin leaned against the repaired telescope pier, pretending the climb had not tired him. At 6, the true hour signal passed down the moor. 7 factory bells answered. The clocks recorded one line with no blank interval between command and wage time. Workers entered the gates when their paid day began. The change did not look like victory from the valley. No crowd shouted. No machinery stopped. People simply kept 11 minutes that had always belonged to them. Some used the time for breakfast. Some walked more slowly. Ruth's youngest son remained asleep against her shoulder until the 6 o'clock bell. Clara opened Samuel's watch and compared it with the northern regulator. The 2 beats met exactly. For years, the tower clocks had surrendered 11 minutes each morning, so the theft could not disappear behind corrected hands at noon. Now they moved through those minutes without hesitation. Alice advanced the new annual roll and stamped the balance wheel mark beside the date. Clara added her own initials beneath Samuel's, not to replace his witness, but to continue it. Below Redwater Moor, 7 mills began on the hour for the first time in 14 years. The observatory kept no stolen minutes that morning because there were none left to record.